This is my second time trying to film this video. Hopefully this take works. I want to talk about all the books that I read in June. I read 13 books in total, which was half of what I read last month. That's okay, it's fine. No big deal. And I enjoyed pretty much all of the books that I read, so let's get started talking about it. First book, I actually don't have a physical copy of it with me here because I checked it out from the library, and that was Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I read the entire Once Upon a Broken Heart series last year, and I've been wanting to go back and read the Caraval series, and I really enjoyed the first book. I haven't bought a copy of it yet because she's coming out with a little novella to the series at the end of this year, and you can buy like the full box set so it all matches, and I plan on doing that. It was pretty much just basically Once Upon a Broken Heart, just like with different character names. It was kind of the same plot, same vibes, really. I like this series, but it's not like it's really well written. It's just a fun read. So you either love this series or you hate this series. I really enjoy it. It's really fun. It's a cute little fairy tale, but it is like pretty much identical to Once Upon a Broken Heart. I'm really excited to read the next ones, and I can't wait to have my holds available from the library. The next book that I read is Children of the Fallen Gods by Carissa Broadbent. I talked about this book in my May reads because I read the first one then. I think I said that it was because I wasn't in the right headspace for a series like this, and that was 100% true because I ate the second book up. It was so good. I literally could not even put into words what these books are about because it is such an intense plot and there's so much happening. But I will say it gives a lot of Throne of Glass vibes, specifically starting at the Throne of Glass book where there is a female main character who is like a slave and being abused and tries to like break free and come to power. That's kind of where you start off, and then it branches. We added a third POV in the second book, and it was insane. It gave very big Manon vibes from Throne of Glass when they introduced her in one of the books, and you're like, who is this new POV? Why am I reading about her? I literally don't care. And then like she becomes one of the most incredible characters in the entire series. That's what happens in this one with the extra POV they add. It is crazy who it is, and I loved this book so much, and I prefer this series way more than the Serpent and the Wings of Night books. This was so good. Next, I read 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. This is a Greek mythology retelling, and it is about the females from the Trojan War and their side of it, because we obviously get mainly the male sides when we have the original Greek myths. This is a heavy book. There are some beautiful stories, and it is just really crushing. One thing I will say about Natalie Haynes is that she jumps POVs so much. There are like 12 different points of views at least in this book, and they do not have a linear timeline. You'll have one from the beginning of the Trojan War, the next one will be from the end of the Trojan War, the next one will be from the middle of the Trojan War. It's just kind of all over the place, which can make it a little bit hard to follow because you're kind of like here and then here and then here. But it is beautiful storytelling, and this was just a phenomenal book. One of my favorite POVs in this book was from Penelope, who is Odysseus' wife, and she is writing letters to Odysseus throughout the entire Trojan War, and then when he leaves and he goes on all these other journeys. So funny because she's literally like, yo, Odysseus, where are you at? I'm hearing of all these sluts you've been finding. Are you ever gonna come back to your wife and your child? It is just really hilarious, and I love this book so much, especially if you're into Greek mythology. I thought this was so good, and it was also really interesting. I was talking to Scott about this because I read The Song of Achilles by Rita Miller last year, and in a lot of these Greek retellings, or when you read or watch Greek mythology stories, you see these heroes and how iconic they are and strong they are, but reading it from the women's view and how they despised Achilles and how they thought he was a horrible person, when in a lot of stuff he's painted as this hero. But when you're a woman and you're watching him kill all of your family, and how just horrible, this book was just, it was hard to read at some points. When a war was ended, the men lost their lives, but the women lost everything else. It was just, it was heavy to read, but it was so good. If you enjoy Greek mythology retellings, this one is so good. I think Cersei is still my all-time favorite, but that one is just beautiful. The next book I read was Percy Jackson 3, and then I read Percy Jackson 4, and then I read Percy Jackson 5, which completed me rereading the Percy Jackson series. Now, Rick did start writing the series again, and I believe Percy is now going into college, so I think I'm gonna go and read those at some point, but right now I just finished the main 5 books in the series, and these were just so fun to read. I love these stories so much, and they are obviously, you know, for a younger demographic than I am, but I read these when I was a kid and I wanted to go back and reread them, and I just love what he does and how he connects everything into the real world and makes it all make sense. And I talk about the Percy Jackson series all the time. I was literally talking about it with Scott last night. I have for the last decade and a half, and I probably will continue it. I love these books, and I think I want to read, I think it's called like either the Chronicles of Cain or the Cain Chronicles, which is his Egyptian version of Percy Jackson, and I'm excited to go through and read these, but these are so fun to read. I'm trying to get Scott to dive into these books because he didn't read them as a kid. I think he would love them. Next, I read The Fairy Bargains of Prospect Hill by Rita Miller. This is a book about fairies, obviously, and 2 sisters who live on a hill where people are known to make fairy bargains, and they make them for everyday little things like hoping that the rain doesn't destroy their crop, and it obviously grows into something more and more intense, and there's a pretty big tragedy that happens and they have to solve it all with the fairies. This book did not have very good reviews when I was looking them up. A lot of people said it was pretty boring and that it was frustrating. I really enjoyed this book and I thought it was a beautiful story. I am very easy to please when it comes to books. It is rare that I say I don't like a book, and I enjoyed this one, and I enjoyed the lore of the fairies in this. It was a lot more standard fairies, obviously, where you're making bargains and they're trying to trick you, but there was an extra element of it because at one point you do go into the land of Fae. There was also some spousal abuse in this book, so that could be something to watch out for. It was frustrating at times to read this book because some of the choices the 2 main characters were making was quite annoying. I read Mother of Death and Dawn, which is the 3rd book in the trilogy. What is this? The War of Lost Hearts. I really don't like when people name their series like a random thing that is not at all connected to the books. Like, this is the 3rd book in the series, and this book got me. It got me. I was sobbing. It was so good. And the entire book, I was so stressed out trying to figure out what was going to happen and how she was going to wrap this up. And it was beautiful. It was good. And I loved it. This is my favorite book of Carissa Broadbent's at the moment. She has another one coming out this year, which I will read, but this was just incredible and a beautiful way to wrap up the book, and I thought it was perfect, and I cried so much during this book, and I sent everybody pictures of me crying while finishing this book because they needed to see it. Next, I read A Rivalry of Hearts by, I don't know how to pronounce her name. It's Tess, her last name I think is Odette. She's the same author who wrote Heart of the Raven Prince. I have now read pretty much all of her books. This is her newest one that just came out last month. It's about 2 authors who go on tour together in the land of like Fae, and they are kind of competing to see who could sell the most books while on their tour so that they can get a deal. And then obviously it's a rivals to lover story, and it was so fun to read. I loved this book so much. I love all of her books. They are perfect. I would compare them a lot to Stephanie Garber's books, where they're just like very light romance fantasy, but I think that hers are better than Stephanie Garber's. Personally, I feel like they have more substance and they just make a lot more sense, and they're really fun, and I really enjoy them, and I would highly recommend her book. They're all interconnected standalones that she has written, and so they're all in the same world. It's called like Fae, I don't know, I can't pronounce it. The main character was mentioned in The Curse of the Wolf King, and then the next book is a spin-off from one of the characters in this book, and it's just, I really like interconnected books. I feel like it's really easy to get into and know where you're at and what's happening because you've already done all the work to immerse yourself in the other books, and it's just easy to pick up and keep going. I love it a lot, and I would really recommend these series. They're all on Kindle Unlimited, and they're super fun to read. Okay, the next book I read was Lovely War by Julie Berry. Now, this book has been getting talked about a lot on YouTube. I've seen people try to describe it, and they're not doing a good job. This book is about World War I. And there are Greek gods in it, but there's not Greek mythology in it. I want to stress that to you. But it's about Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus, and Aphrodite and Ares are on trial, obviously, for Aphrodite cheating on Hephaestus with Ares. So she is telling the boys a love story about her greatest loves that she has put together, and that happened in World War I. And so she is just telling them about these two people who she helped fall in love and how she helped them along the way. There's no Greek mythology. This is not based in, ancient times. This is based during World War I, and there are two love stories that you are following which are kind of connected, and this is a really beautiful book. This is YA. I love YA. Honestly, it's one of my favorite things to read. It's so easy. It doesn't really stress me out. And I've never said this about a book before, but this would have been a better book if it had been adult historical fiction, I think, personally. The love stories, I loved following them, but this was Aphrodite narrating a love story, and so you would go back and have Aphrodite's POV talking with the other gods, and those specific scenes felt very immature to me. I've never said that about a book. My mom always says that she feels like you can tell a book is YA because it is written immaturely. I've never felt that way until this book. I feel like the writing could have been elevated a little bit, but this was a beautiful book. The next book I don't have a physical copy of either. I wanted to just finish reading all of Carissa Broadbent's books, so I read Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. She wrote this in a collection with a bunch of other fantasy writers, but this one is off of the Crowns of Nyaxis world, but it's not connected yet. It might be later on, I believe. And this is about a human who is in this cult, and she doesn't have any eyes, so she wears a red scarf over her face, and then she's trying to go and kill this vampire conqueror. And spoiler alert, they fall in love. And I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't anything really deep. It wasn't anything crazy good, but I did really enjoy it. Again, more than Serpent on the Wings of Night, it was really fun to read. I felt like the love story was really compelling, and they were together for months before they fell in love, and that's a really big thing for me. I have a pet peeve when people like to Romeo and Juliet things, and it's like, oh, I've known each other a week and now we're getting married. That's a big pet peeve of mine. Give them at least a month or two, and I liked that they had been together for several months before they fell in love. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of intrigue throughout the book. I enjoyed it. And if you've read Serpent on the Wings of Night, I highly recommend going back and reading her other series because I think they're better. Okay, the next book I read was The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I listened to this one on audiobook, and it took me over a month. Audiobooks are not doing much for me right now. I am a big fan of the Grishaverse. I have read every single book, including the graphic novel of the Grishaverse. It is one of my favorite series. And so I wanted to go and read all of Leigh Bardugo's books, and I started with this one because it just recently came out. This one is about a character who I believe lives in Madrid, and she has a little bit of magic. And because she has magic, she has to hide from the Spanish Inquisition, and because she's also a little bit Jewish, and she is worried about being persecuted. And then she ends up going into this competition to be the king's chosen one, with a little bit of magic, and so she's competing against these other magic people, and then there's a little bit of a romance subplot, and there's a lot of tragedy in this book as well. I really struggled with the names in this book. I had a hard time figuring out who was talking because a lot of the names were quite difficult and similar, and so a lot of times I was like, who is this person again? But I really enjoyed this book. Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed all the books I read this month. They were all really great, and this one is nothing special, but I did enjoy it, and I love all of Leigh Bardugo's books. I think they're incredible, and I liked the love story in that one. I thought it was really beautiful and sweet. I was about to die, but the last book I read is another one with Greek mythology in it, and that is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I would say is my least favorite out of the Greek mythology retellings. Nope, I'm lying. Song of Achilles was, and then this one. It was a beautiful story, but it wasn't as heartbreaking as the other ones were. The first 50 pages of this book, I was in it. It was so good, and then it lulled for 100 pages, then it got really good, and then it lulled. But it follows Ariadne, who helps Theseus defeat the Minotaur and escape. And then it also follows her younger sister, who ends up marrying Theseus later on. And then it talks about Ariadne and her relationship with Dionysus, I never know how to pronounce his name. I really hate men in Greek mythology, and this book ended in such a shattering way, but I would highly recommend this, and the cover is really pretty. That's my wrap up. We can call this one I just really love Greek mythology. But that's everything I read in June. Sorry this was so fast. I think my kids just got home and I needed to get this finished before they got here. Thanks for coming and chatting with me for a bit, guys. I really appreciate it.